Hello beautiful internet family, my name is Dan Davis and I'm the creative director here at DansTube.TV, as well as the Fearless Drone Academy, which is the ultimate online drone course for beginners. And today I've got my 25 must-know tips and settings for the newly released DJI Mavic 3 Classic. This video is packed with some gems. There are some really cool tips and settings with this newly released drone. But if you do have any other tips or settings that I did not mention in this video, please let us know in the comments below. I'd love to help even more people, and also I'd love to learn some more tips and settings as well. So let us know in the comments below and we can start some discussions there. But let's jump into tip number one. Tip number one is kind of an extra tip. It's related to the DJI RC. After that, the rest of the tips and settings will be specifically tailored for the DJI Fly application and the Mavic 3 Classic, but this tip works for anyone that has the DJI RC. It's all to do with the maps. Now, a lot of people complain that they don't have the fully loaded maps on the DJI RC. It doesn't have a cellular connection, and a lot of the time if you're in the field, near the water, or in the bush, you're not going to have Wi-Fi. So a lot of the time the maps will not be loaded in for you. Now, a very easy way to work around this is basically by hotspotting to your phone while you're in the field. Very simple to hotspot. I've got my iPhone hotspotting, and then I connect through the DJI RC, the Wi-Fi settings. And then once I've connected it in and it's got some form of, a connection to the internet, I click on the maps and I zoom out to basically load a large area, a portion of the map that I want to fly in. So then once that's done, I can actually turn off the hotspot on my phone, so you don't have to keep it going. And then that area has been cached and it's ready for you to fly and continue flying for however many batteries you've got. You can do the same principle with your home Wi-Fi. You can connect the controller, load up an area in the map, and then it will cache that area. So then when you get to the location, you are ready to go. So that's the first tip. Nice and easy to do, and it kind of works around a lot of the complaints that people have about the maps in the DJI RC, the controller itself. Tip number two is the flight checklist menu. Now, this is one of my favorite tips and something that you can do on pretty much all the DJI drones. Not everyone uses it or knows about it, but in the top left corner, you will see takeoff permitted right next to that N mode. So N mode is basically what mode the controller is in or the drone is in, whether that's like the cinematic, the normal, or the sports mode. So basically, to the right hand side of that, it will say either takeoff permitted or it might say something else depending on what stage the drone is up to in its boot up process. It will also pop up with errors there. If the drone is having any errors, it will also tell you. Typically, it'll also say aircraft not connected to RC as you're swapping between apps. So that's another kind of thing that it can display, but that's like the information section. If you tap on that, it will pull up a menu, and there's a bunch of different things that you can customize in there. With the flight checklist menu, it's really important to know where it is, because this is actually going to chuck up a lot of those error messages. If you have any issues with the drone, any sort of error or anything that's going wrong with it, it will let you know in that top left corner. So you can tap on it and it will pull up a full log of the errors. If everything's fine though, it won't give you any errors, and you can play around with a few different settings in here relating to the return to home, the max altitude, max distance, as well as storage location as well. It's a really easy menu to access and gives you some important things at a glance. Tip number three is the battery menu. Now, this is a really easy one to access. You can't get the information if the drone is on the ground. It actually has to be flying. And I noticed that once I took off the drone and just let it hover, it wouldn't display the information. I actually had to start moving the drone. But once the drone is in the air and it started flying for a bit, you can tap in the top right corner, that green circle that changes color depending on the battery percentage, but it will say like 96, 95, whatever it says, that's the percentage of your battery. And you can tap on that and it will pull up some really important information. So it will let us know how long until it's going to return to home, until it's actually going to force the landing of the drone, and until the battery is completely depleted. So these are key pieces of information you want to get back well and truly before you get to the forced landing or the battery depleted. And that's why I always say make sure you're nice and close by about 30%, and then fly for a bit more and land by about 25%, and you're going to be fine at that point. And also now in the top left corner, you can see where that flight checklist menu option is. It now says in flight. So it will change depending on what the drone is doing, but I can tap on in flight and it will then take me to the same menu that we saw before, which is the flight checklist menu. Tip number 4 is to do with the zooming functionality. So you can access this once you're in the video mode, and then from there you can just tap where it says 1 times and you can go to 2 times and then to 3 times zoom in the video settings. But if you also want to get a little bit more technical, you can press and hold and then it will bring up a sliding wheel. And as you drag your finger either up or down, you can adjust that zoom point and it tells you what the equivalent is. So it will say 48mm or 72mm when it gets to the 3 times zoom. So this just gives you a smoother kind of transition between the zooming functions. And now moving on to tip number 5, and this is the autofocus and manual focus options. So again, you can just tap on that button and it will go between autofocus and manual focus. Same with that zooming option where you can just tap it and go between it. Or what you can do is press and hold, similar to that zooming option, and then you can really adjust the manual focus. So pressing and holding will bring up that slider wheel again, and then you can drag up and down to get that focus point that you're looking for. This isn't going to be for everyone because with most people, if you're using your drone, you just want that infinity focus. But if something's in the foreground and you want that to be the focus and then you want to push the focus to the background, then you can actually do that with the Mavic 3 Classic using this slider wheel. Tip number 6 is a new feature for the Mavic 3 Classic. It's now also available for Mavic 3 users, but this is the night video mode. So really cool offering here. But all you have to do is just tap on the right there above the recording option and you can adjust from video into the night mode. Once you tap on that, it's then straight in the night mode and you can customize some of the settings there if you want to. But it's really cool that now we've got a new night mode specifically for Mavic 3 Classic and Mavic 3 users. At the time of me recording this, the night video mode was only available in 4K up to 30 frames per second, so you can't customize resolution or frame rate, but 4K 30 is great, especially for a specific mode that works in any sort of low light or night setting. Tip number 7 is to do with the Pro mode, and this is really easy to enable. Just in the bottom right corner, you'll see automatically, it'll probably say auto for you, but if you press that, it will then unlock the Pro mode, which gives you so much more freedom and customization. The Pro mode's kind of broken down into 2 different menu systems. So on the left-hand side of the Pro mode, you'll see there's 4 options there. And then on the left side of those 4 options are another 4 options. So those 2 sets of 4 options are almost like 2 separate menu systems. So let's say, for example, we tap on the EV selection, the one that says S, F, ISO, and EV. We click on that and it will bring up a specific Pro menu where we can customize some of the settings. In here you can play around with the ISO, the shutter. You can also play around with the aperture because this drone actually has adjustable aperture. So you can play around with that and really get the most out of every scene that you're in. So that's great that you can turn those all off. They're on auto by default when you go over to the Pro mode, but you can disable all of those auto settings and customize it fully. And to be able to play around with that adjustable aperture is a big selling point for a lot of people. Tip number 8 is just the additional Pro settings. Like I said, this is broken down into 2 menu systems. So when we're already in that initial menu system, you can see down the bottom there's another little option that kind of looks like some sliders. So if you tap on that, that will take you over to the other Pro settings. Once you're in this menu here, you can play around with the white balance as well as the resolution and frame rate, depending on what mode you're in. If you're just in a normal video mode, you can customize that completely and choose whatever you want. You can also quickly change between the different storage options. You can adjust the color options as well as all the coding formats. So you can really play around with everything here. And it's great to just have it at a glance. Like I love settings where you can just tap on something and you've got everything visibly available. And also to be able to have the video feed in the background is great, as opposed to going through the other menu system where you can't see as much of the video feed from the drone. Just before I get into the safety menu, I have a really awesome opportunity for my audience. If you want to get yourself a new drone, if you're eyeing off the Mavic 3 Classic maybe, or even the Mini 3 Pro, then you can send a direct message or an email to the D1 store, which is sales@d1store.com.au. Just mention DansTube, that's all you have to say. Just say you're checking out DansTube content, you're really enjoying it, and that will unlock some special pricing for you. So then, depending on what you're looking for, the D1 store will sort you out and help you out with the best deal they can. So definitely explore that if you're looking into some new drones or cameras or whatever it may be that's available through the D1 store. So now we're going to move on to the safety menu, which you can access from the flight menu in the top right corner where those 3 dots are. Pressing on that will take you straight into the safety menu. And the first tip here, which is tip number 9, is bypass avoidance. So you can see the first setting is obstacle avoidance action, and by default it's on brake. So basically if it notices something in the environment, it will just brake. It will stop and won't hit that object or obstacle. But if you go on bypass, as the name suggests, the drone will then automatically bypass any detected obstacles and continue to move on that path. The other cool thing with bypass is you have a few different options. So you have normal and the nifty mode. So you can also play around with those because they're both quite unique in their movements. And that's just another option within that bypass avoidance option, which you don't get through the brake option. So again, play around with that, make sure you're in a safe environment, and it's a lot of fun to play with. Moving on to tip number 10, and this is to do with the advanced return to home section. So it's set up under the optimal advanced return to home, but I personally prefer to go with preset. Basically what this does is, regardless of what's happening, the drone will get to that altitude. So let's say your auto return to home altitude is 100 or 80 meters. It will then preset to whatever it is. The drone will fly to that altitude and then come back to you, where optimal will actually try to avoid obstacles and get back to you in the most effective way, which is great. But in certain situations where there's a lot going on, especially if there's a bunch of trees, I'd prefer for the drone to just get to a safe height and then come back to me. Tip number 11 is a little further down, and it's the battery info section. This doesn't give you too much to play around with, but you can just view this regularly to make sure that the cells are all healthy. You can see they all need to be on that same kind of level. Some of them on mine are slightly different, right? 4.19 as opposed to 4.18, but because they're all green, they're all healthy. It would be completely different if some of the cells were damaged and they were halfway down as opposed to all on that same level. So just keep an eye on that. You can also see the battery temperature as well as how many battery cycles that specific battery has had. So great at a glance information through the battery info menu. Tip number 12 is aircraft front arm LEDs. By default, it's set on, which means that the LEDs at the front of the aircraft on the front arms will be on, but you can turn that into auto, which means that when you start shooting, if you're capturing a video, then it will turn those lights off. So let's say, for example, you're close to something and you want to capture that. The lights from the actual aircraft could affect the video. So it's nice to have it on auto just in case you are going to be filming close to something. Obviously make sure you're doing it safely and legally. Scrolling right down to the bottom, there is the advanced safety settings. And in here is tip number 13. And this is how you can enable and disable AirSense. Now by default, you should just leave it on because it's actually a really cool feature. It lets you know if any aircraft are in the area and lets you know to kind of adjust your altitude depending on what's going on. So straight when you get an alert, you can just, decrease the altitude of the drone and bring it back to you. So leave that on by default, but if you ever need to turn it off, that's where you will find that. Once AirSense is enabled, you can go into the map setting again, which is on the flight menu, and then you can click on that plane icon, and from there you can customize a few different things here. So you can go from high all the way up to the low, medium, high collision risk. That means that it will let you know if you've got the bottom one on, which is low, medium, high. It will let you know about everything that's basically going on in that area, all the planes that are flying around, and it just gives you some information. So I like to have that bottom setting on, but you can do whatever you want to here. It's just nice to be able to customize that and play around with the settings a bit more. Moving on to the control menu, which again, when we're on the flight menu, top right corner, press those 3 little dots and it will take you back into the safety menu. But on the right-hand side of that safety menu, once you've gone back from the advanced safety settings, on the right-hand side of the safety menu, you've got control. So if you click on that, this is where tip number 14 is. Tip number 14 is called subject scanning, and the drone has to be in flight for this to actually pop up as an option, but it's in the control menu and you just enable subject scanning. And then what will happen is you'll get little pluses over things that you can start tracking. So whether it's a boat, a car, or a person, it will pop up with a little plus. So you don't have to draw a box around that thing anymore. It will just pop up, recognize it, and you can immediately start tracking it. This is an easy option to enable and such a powerful option as well, because it saves a lot of time, a lot of troubleshooting and trial and error. It just picks it up straight away. Tip number 15 is called gain and Expo tuning. So this is just below the subject scanning section, and this actually gives you a lot of control. So you can play around with pretty much all of the outputs from the drone itself and the controller. It will let you truly customize the flight experience, the gimbal settings, and everything that you want to customize. It's really powerful, and I love it that they've condensed it into this one area here. You can also go from normal to cine to sports mode, so you can customize it based on what mode you're in, and you can have custom settings for each one. But this is quite a powerful option here. You can play around with it, see how it flies, and then you can always reset it right at the bottom if you're not happy with it. But this just gives you a lot of control here. Tip number 16 is the FPV mode, and you can't actually enable it while subject scanning is on, so you have to disable subject scanning and then it will pop up and you can enable the FPV mode. So this actually means that the camera will follow the movement of the drone. So as you're turning left and right, you get those very unique banking shots that are well known in the FPV world, as opposed to the follow mode where the gimbal itself will basically follow the movement. So as you're going left and right, the gimbal is going to counter that and make it look nice and smooth. So that's how you can get those nice cinematic smooth shots. But FPV will actually follow the movement of the drone basically. So as you're banking around, you get some very unique shots here. So nice and easy to enable and to kind of play around with as well. Tip number 17 is a little bit lower on the control menu. It's called button customization. And in here, this is where you can truly play around with the button customization. Regardless of what controller you have, you'll have some buttons on the back of the actual controller itself, and these can be programmed. So they're either like function buttons or the C buttons. So on the DJI RC, you can see that I've got the C1 and C2 button, and I can then customize what actually happens when I'm either pressing those buttons or as I'm pressing and scrolling with the wheel. And you can really play around with this. It's cool that you can zoom in, for example, by pressing and holding a button and then scrolling on the wheel. So I would recommend playing around with the button customization and really getting used to what works for you and what's practical for you in the typical kind of environments that you're shooting in. Tip number 18 is within the button customization menu, and this is where you can enable cruise control, which is a brand new feature for the Mavic 3 Classic, and it also came out for the Mavic 3 via a firmware update. Now, in my initial review, the version I had didn't allow me to use cruise control in the video menu or in the video options, but now I can use cruise control with hyperlapses as well as in the video settings. So for me, this is a game changer, because what I can do now is I can start flying towards something, press that button on the back, whichever one I've programmed, and the drone will literally be in cruise control, as the name suggests, similar to when you put your car in cruise control. I can then still use the controller, so I can put in different kind of inputs, but the drone itself is going to be set at that speed that I'm flying at, and it's locked. As you can see in the bottom left corner, it will lock the speed. So that to me is very, very cool. I love that I can customize my flight experience now and have cruise control set up for the video settings as well. Moving on to the camera menu now. This is on the right hand side of the control menu. Again, via those three dots in the top right corner, tap on those, go across to the camera menu. And tip number 19 is the color settings. So you can really play around with your color options here. And the Mavic 3 Classic is a powerful drone. You've got normal, D-Log, as well as HLG, all amazing options. And most people, you know, the average person is going to be very happy with normal, but the other options just give you a lot more to play around with and a lot more freedom to really get the most out of the image. I also love that with D-Log you can put on the like the display assist so that the color will be a bit more natural, because D-Log is a very flat profile. To be able to have that color assist while you're flying is a nice little touch. Tip number 20, still in that camera menu, is the histogram setting. I love to enable this because it just lets you know what's happening. You want to have that nice bell curve in the middle there to make sure that the colors are really popping and you don't have like overexposed or underexposed areas. This is really nice to be able to see at a glance and make sure that things are looking nice. And if you don't know much about histograms, you can always just put the drone in auto and then see how it customizes those settings to basically make the image look amazing. So I would say that's the best way to do it. You can also look online and see how to read a histogram, but just play around with the auto settings, fly in different locations and see what the drone itself does to counter certain things to make that histogram create the bell curve. Check that out and let me know if you've got any other tips as well below. Another really easy way to see what the histogram is doing is just go into the auto settings, which is in the bottom right corner of the flight menu, and then just play around with that EV. So just basically tap on it and swipe or slide left and right, and you'll see what the histogram is doing based on how the image is popping up. So when it's overexposed, you'll see which way the histogram goes. When it's underexposed, you'll see that as well. And it will just give you some information to kind of play with. Tip number 21 is the peaking level. Now this is to do with the manual focus mode. Again, not for everyone. You might not want to play around with the manual focus on your drone, but if you do, then you can click on here and it will go from a few different options. You've got low, normal, and high, and this basically just lets you know how much of that red is going to start popping in. So the red is like what's in focus, and it's all going to be outlined if it's in focus. So if you put it in the high setting, then you're going to see exactly what's going on, but it's also a little bit overwhelming. But this is handy to go into and just play around with, especially if you've got something in the foreground that you really want to focus on and you don't want that background to be focused on, you want a bit more bokeh, then go with that high peaking level, go to the manual settings and just, you know, start scrolling through it and see where that sweet spot is. That's probably the easiest way to go about it, but it's cool that you can genuinely use manual focus with your drone and get some pretty unique perspectives and shots from the sky. Moving on to tip number 22, and this is the overexposure warning. Straight when you tap that on, you will see all of those patterns in the sky, the black and white patterns, and this is basically letting you know what is overexposed. A lot of the time it will tell you that a cloud is overexposed, so just keep that in mind. But as you're adjusting the EV, you can see exactly what's going on and how much more overexposed it becomes as you're putting the EV into the plus. But as we start coming down, you can see that it starts to disappear and it becomes more of a natural exposure. So really easy to set up. It can be a bit overwhelming for some people, but I like this setting. Moving on to the transmission menu. Now this is next to the camera menu in the main settings area. And once you click on that, this is tip number 23, and this is how you can view the interference. So if you leave the frequency on dual band, the channel mode on auto, you can see in real time what is happening. You can see all the interference, all the signals, and it just gives you some information, especially if you're noticing that you're not getting much range out of the drone, for example. Just land the drone close to you, go into this menu here, and it will let you know what's happening in the area and how much interference there is. Tip number 24 is how you can enable the manual channel mode. So you can either go into the 2.4 gigahertz or the 5.8 gigahertz, and then from there you can customize the channel mode. So this is really cool. It's not for everyone again, but if you are noticing that the dual band auto isn't doing the right job for you, then for example, you can come into 5.8 gigahertz, go to manual, and then as you press on that graph and move your finger across, you'll choose a different channel there. So that can actually get you to a point that you've got better range and better signal. By default though, just leave it on auto because that's going to do the best job in most situations, but this is how you can manually adjust the channel mode. The final tip is located in the About section. So once you tap on the About section, you've got a few little blue pieces of text that say check for updates. So you can check the fly safe data as well as the aircraft firmware. And this is how you can manually check for updates. So by default, it should pop up and let you know that there's an update. But with the DJI RC, for example, it might not automatically connect to your home Wi-Fi. You might not be hotspotting, so you might not actually know if there's an update. So clicking on this, it will let you know that you need to update your drone or you need to update the fly safe data. Make sure you're obviously connected to Wi-Fi or to your phone, and then from there you can update manually through the About menu. But anyway guys, that is the end of this video. These are my 25 must-know tips and settings for the DJI Mavic 3 Classic. I really hope that you've gained some insights and information here. There are some really cool settings with this new drone, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've got any tips and settings that you swear by, and I'll chat to you in the next video. Peace.
Pain all around, is it worth it? I can't touch the ground, is it hopeless? I'm still